Welcome to our present state versus history on Speaker. Here we are focused on the current events of our culture through the principles of our history, trying to make sense of the culture and the mindset of today. I am your host, Ray Mayfield. Alrighty, folks. Well, here we are back on the pod. Looks like we finally got sound equipment going. Sounds a little bit better. And run some trial tests. Looks like we're going to be able to do some phone interviews now and get things going. I want to kind of shift gears here a little bit. I don't know how long we'll go into this series, I guess you could say, but I want to focus a little bit of time here on the principles of freedom. And there's several of them. But I'm gonna just kind of go down through a lesson that I did several years ago and recap on some things, and we'll see where it takes us through the process of doing this. I'm hoping to be able to get in contact with some of the folks that I've met throughout the years at different times that are of like faith or like understanding and the areas of the Constitution and our history and how these things really play into our daily life and how the lack of that is what has affected us in our ability to move in areas where we need to go. And it's not anything new. It's the same things that was going on back at the Revolution. It's the things that our forefathers were aware of and alarmed them, I guess, more than anything about whether or not our nation could survive being a free, self-governed people. So these basic principles, I guess you could say, have never changed. They're the same. They're universal principles that affect everything around us. They affect this nation tremendously, because it was these principles that our forefathers came in agreement with the whole miraculous conception of them coming together. You know, the fact that the men that gathered together and created our Constitution and our what do you call it, documents of liberty, that they had the similar backgrounds, similar teachings, they had read similar philosophies, they had studied similar events, and yet they were from all different backgrounds, different age groups, and they were all brought together to be meeting in that same room. And it's just that in itself is a miraculous intervention of divine providence, George Washington called it. We're going to just deal a little bit with some of the things that they had agreed on that were the driving principles under their thought process of forming this government, and what was required for the success of what they felt like would come in. Anyway, we're going to look at men like Mr. Blackstone, who was a professor of law. John Locke was one, and Marcus Tullius Cicero. We're going to kind of focus on him more than anything in this session today anyway. Cicero, he seemed to just cut through the philosophical errors of Plato and Aristotle, which there seems to be the only two that modern day teachers want to teach about in philosophy and the things of the liberal arts, which is basically where those folks were embedded into. But Blackstone, he said that it is the only reliable basis for a stable society and a system of justice, referring to natural law. Well, their idea of natural law was the laws were created by a natural, true, supreme creator, and that there was no possible chance that our societies and the order of our cosmos just happened by chance. And that was the basis that they were making his statements on for justice in a society, that there was no other reliable basis other than natural law. Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, and Cicero lived that next year kind of in exile running, and then in 43 he was murdered. He was a leading lawyer in Rome. He sat on the Roman council. He recognized right conduct with the laws of a supreme creator of the universe. He called the creator's order of things natural law or true law. So that's where these terms came from Cicero, because he's talking about the creator of order, and that puts things in natural law. A fundamental presumption of the natural law is that man's reasoning power only shared with the creator made right reason, because he says that we were created with the ability to reason. We were created with the ability to have memory and recall, and the only beings that we shared that with was God himself, because all other animal life form on the earth did not have that ability, and still to this day does not have that ability to reason. I know we think our animals, are all part of the family, they call them. We love them like family. Well, that might be true, but they can't reason. They don't logically deduct. They don't rationale their behaviors. They do it out of instinct. And there's a whole different reality of conduct when it's driven by instinct rather than man's reasoning. And he says that the only two that share that are the celestial beings, or God, and man himself. And that right reason, when it comes to its maturity, it equals into common sense. And that sense, when it is concluded, it brings forth order or justice. See, in the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "And the laws of nature and the nature's God." See, he's bringing that out because they believe that basic precept of our existence, or the liberties that we have, the life that we live, is based on the liberties given by God, not by government. That's the point. That the things that we have declared in our Constitution in this country, that we protect by our laws in this country, are not given by the governments of this country. They are just protected by it, because they are actually given by the Creator. And this was the point that they were recognizing. I want to read this first paragraph in our Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote, which is where that quote had just been taken from. It says, "When the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respective to the options of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impel them to the separation." So he's saying we need to declare what these causes were, and he goes on through the Declaration of Independence to the phrase everybody's familiar is, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." Well, the truths that they hold to be self-evident are the truths that have been declared by nature's God, or the Creator himself. And this philosophy came from Cicero. Cicero was the introducer, or the introduction of these type of ideology, and he was the one who was pushing these things into becoming true, shall we say, philosophies of men and government. Even in some of his writings, he knew that in the time and frame in which he was writing these things, when you read Cicero's writings, he knew that it was premature to the day that he was writing it, but he dreamed of a futuristic society, he called it, that would embrace these laws. And he talked about if men understood those things, we would live in a virtuous measure, second to only the gods. And I'll get to that quote here in a little bit there. I think I wrote that down in my notes here. But that natural law is what the forefathers and Cicero and John Locke all declared as true law. And he says that we cannot be freed from it by a senate or a people. We need not to look outside of ourselves for an expounder or interpreter of it, as no boundaries of time and space. So one of the things that he's talking about there is us being self-governed. He's saying we don't have to look outside of ourselves, this is Thomas Jefferson, to find the definition or to have the explanation of these laws to us, because we already know what's right and what's wrong. And see, he's talking, they're administering there to the goodness of man, or the goodness of mankind, if you will, and trying to declare that we know that we need to be good one to another. And we know that we should operate in these things, and we have to regulate ourselves, if you will. It's something I'm always talking about is being regulated. If we don't self-regulate, we become regulated, see? And we have to have that divine reasoning within ourselves so that we'll walk in what it is that God's called us to walk in, but we have to do that on our own record or reconnaissance. There's a section I want to read here out of some of Cicero's writings. Cicero, he wrote here, he said, "The animals which we call man, endued with foresight and quick intelligence, complex, keen positioning memory, full of reason and prudence, has been given a certain distinguishable status by the supreme God who created him. For he is the only one among so many different kinds and varieties of living beings who has a share in reasoning and thought, while all the rest are deprived of it. But that is more divine, or what is more divine, I will not say in man only, but in all of heaven and earth, than reason. And reason, when it is full grown and perfect, is rightly called wisdom. Therefore, since there is nothing better than reason, and since it exists both in man and God, the first common possession of man and God is reason. But those who have reason in common must also have right reason in common, and since right reason is law, we must believe that men have law also in common with the gods. Further, those who share law must also share justice, and those who share these are to be regarded as members of the same commonwealth. If indeed they obey the same authorities and powers, this is true in a far greater degree, but as the matter of fact, they do obey this celestial system, the divine mind and God of the transcendent power. Hence, we must now conceive of this whole universe is one commonwealth of man and the gods. These were the conclusions that Cicero wrote. That's some of his writings there. And what's fascinating about Cicero coming to these conclusions is you have to remember that this is 40 years, it's more than that, because it was 44 and 43 when the assassinations took place. So it was, 45, 46, 47, 8, maybe 50 years. Excuse